Project managers, have you ever felt like you should get that promotion or a better job? Start a business. Write that book. Have you ever felt you were made for more but didn't know where to start?
Welcome to the PM for the Masses podcast with your host, Caesar Abaid.
Learn from the experts. Think outside the box. Have a voice, network, and be extraordinary.
PM for the Masses podcast.
Well, hello everyone and welcome. Caesar Abaid, your host, and this show is your regular reminder that your career matters more than your job and that your life is a project and you are the manager. Whether you work for a company or for yourself, your job stability, like I always say, is really just your ability to land your next gig. So join me in practicing intentional, planned, and value-adding relevance, starting right now. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce my guest, James Louttit. James is a seasoned project management expert with over 20 years of experience. His journey into mastering the art of project management took a transformative turn 6 years ago after a health scare forced him to rethink how he approached his work. Determined to make an impact without burning out, James became the project management competency lead at a major bank and later served as a chief information officer at one of Ireland's most recognized companies. Throughout his career, James has managed countless successful projects, trained over 600 project managers, and led award-winning teams through agile transformations and technology innovations. His mission now is to share his insights to help project managers reduce stress, manage stakeholders effectively, and bring more joy to their teams. I'm just done reading his book. It's delightful. I mean, there's a lot of books out there on project management. This one is fun. It's delightful. It is quirky, and it made project management fun. Cannot recommend it enough. And we're going to talk about that in a second here. Now, James holds PMP, SAFE, and SAMC certifications, and he brings a wealth of knowledge from both his extensive research and practical experience, developing methodologies for organizations in financial services and beyond. Outside his professional work, James is a passionate economist, DIY enthusiast, scout leader, and a proud father of three. Good morning, James. How are you?
I'm really good, thanks, Caesar. Great to meet you.
Nice to meet you too, and thanks for accommodating. We tried to record this last week, but I wasn't feeling well. I appreciate it.
That's the world we live in. Like, we move things around, and it's great that it's so easy to do it nowadays, isn't it?
I know, especially considering how far apart we are. Imagine if you had flown all the way to Canada for this conversation, and then you had to turn around and go back home. Where are you located again? For the audience?
I'm in Dublin. I'm originally from a place called High Wycombe, just outside London, but I live in Ireland now with my family.
Lovely. Yeah, my daughter is dying to go visit Ireland one day, so we're gonna have to do that at some point.
It's a beautiful place. I can highly recommend coming over.
Sounds good. So, James, I just read your lovely, delightful book on project management, leading impactful teams. And we were just talking about this before starting the recording. It's a novel, I'd say even like cute and entertaining approach to a topic that can be very dry, as you know. If you read the PMBOK guide, it's not nighttime reading entertaining.
Well, it's a good way to go to sleep, I suppose, sometimes.
I guess, yeah. You can count sheep, or you can learn about the input-output tools and techniques of project management.
That's it. And I had the same experience over and over again reading books about this stuff. And I love all kinds of different books, like with stories and mostly business books, but mostly kind of self-help, those kind of things. And I really wanted to do something in that space that people can read, listen to, and enjoy, maybe even like by the pool when they're relaxing. So the idea is stories and cartoons and things to bring things to life for people, but hopefully useful as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and the illustrations, the whole thing is delightful. So I'm gonna add a link to the book to our show notes for this episode, which, by the way, it's pmforthemasses.com/153. So all the links, we'll talk about it here. You can find it there. Now,
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem. So I just wanted to, the topic that I like to cover is emotional intelligence in project management, especially for project managers. And because this is something that I see all the time, and I don't know that this is teachable. I don't, and that's why I like to explore this with you a little bit.
Yeah.
Because, you be in a meeting, or, I just came back for a company meetup. Our company is distributed, so once a year we kind of get together. And sometimes people raise their hand and ask a question like, are you even in this room? Is the right place to be asking this, the right time to be asking this? or and I feel like sometimes I think there's something missing. I don't know if that's teachable, and I think it's emotional intelligence, but I'm not sure. But I like to cover that. But before we do that, in your book, you talk about project management being a set of lenses, right? Or techniques, right? And so, can you talk a little bit about that? What are these lenses, and just briefly, what they are? And I thought it was an interesting take on how to look at a project from different perspectives.
Yeah. So when I was so the wonderful thing about writing stuff down is you really have to understand it. You really have to kind of get into it and articulate it. And especially when you go through the process of writing a book, you're working with an editor, and they're going to challenge you and say, hang on, that doesn't make sense. And for me, I wanted to, so I've done my PMP and my Scaled Agile framework and like Scrum Master and all of these different certifications and things. But I wanted to boil it down to something that people can actually just use immediately in seconds to think about their projects. And I was trying to think about the kind of topics I wanted to cover. And what does project management look like? And I was doing my research, and I was reading all the other people's thoughts on this stuff. And it boiled down to probably 7 what I now call lenses of project management. And 8 lenses of project management, one of which is not covered by most people in their books or in their learning and training. So the lenses of project management are straightforward. So it's scope, time, cost, quality, team, stakeholder, and risk. Okay, and those are things that you'll talk about with your other guests, and lots of people think about in terms of project management. But the one that people miss, the one that I think is so fundamental to the success of so many of the things we're going to get onto, maybe around emotional intelligence and stress and some of those things, is prioritization and deciding what you do and don't do. And so the construct of the lenses is really to help people just remember those 8 things, and then just look through their project, through those lenses at their project from time to time, whenever they're doing something. So have a look at the plan in the context of risk and in the context of stakeholders. Have a look at the risk log or the PID, the initiation document, in the context of what's happening in terms of cost or quality. So that's the idea, is that you can look through those lenses, and they're useful for looking at your project in.
Mm-hmm. I like the compartmentalization as well, because sometimes we'll get into a meeting and start talking about a project, especially in the initial phases, and it's just analysis paralysis, because people start raising their concerns about different things, and it's usually one of these 7 things, right? That's great, that's the scope, but what about that one guy, C-level, who is not on board with this type of stuff, and that's, of course, that's the stakeholder, right?
Yeah.
And then, well, what about the cost? So I thought it was interesting to kind of let's put on a filter of costs, for example, our budget, right? And forget everything else. Okay, what is it? If we consider everything else is perfect, but we need to be concerned about the budget, what are the concerns? What we need to consider, things like that, and then.
And I think it's even a bit more than that, right? So I like to have a place that I can think about these things. So, for example, a risk log is a great tool. Like, we can talk about risk later on, because I think most people don't manage risk particularly well, and a lot of people miss this amazing superpower that I call it, of tying your contingency back to your risks. But having a place where when a risk comes up, so when you're talking about stakeholders or you're talking about the plan, and bing, hang on a second, that sounds like a risk. And capturing it and making sure that you're then thinking about it, or when you're talking about the scope of the project, and you've got your requirements traceability matrix open, and bing, oh, hang on a second, there's a stakeholder over there who we haven't thought of, and you can then think about that and maybe put that into your notes or your actions in terms of, I must reach out to that stakeholder. So that's the idea, is that each of these things play off against each other and come up in so many different parts of the discussions around the project.
Yeah, it's the idea of capturing. So you may not even be let's say it's a meeting about budget, and then the stakeholder X comes up as a concern. You can capture and put that to the side and say, okay, we're talking about budget, but we can't forget this part. We're capturing this for later, so we can. In a way, it's almost like person. I'm a big fan of personal productivity. I do this all the time because I have ADHD, for example, right? I'll be in a meeting and say, hey, I need to buy cat food, which is totally unrelated to whatever is happening. But if I don't write it down somewhere, then I know it's not going to be taken care of, because we always think of the things that are important, not necessarily the right context, right? So,
yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
and it's often when you're, it's one of the other things I talk about in the book, is this idea of contemplation. So when you're in the shower, bing, oh no, I've got an idea and there's no pen, I can't write it down. That always happens. So I like to build contemplation into my day, that I can go away and think about these things. But I tend to have my phone with a little notes app on it, that I can take these things and then I can deal with them when I'm in front of the computer or in the right meeting.
James, I think this is one of the big things that are missing in today's culture, right? Like the ability to sit down and contemplate. We used to do that because we had no choice. I remember, when I was in high school, had to take the bus home, just standing by the sidewalk, but the bus stop, waiting for the city bus to come. Sometimes it takes 20 minutes, 25 minutes. And I'm just standing there. There's no phone. This is not that long ago. This is like in the mid 90s, right? There's no phone. I'm just standing there thinking. I'm there with myself, looking at the same building across the street, counting the windows and thinking about architecture, we don't have that anymore. And I think this might be a good tie into the emotional intelligence topic. I'm having a hard time these days because like I just said, I'm distractible. It is even a diagnosis for me, it's something I struggle with. But at the same time, I am a high output person. I have my job. I have my marriage. I have 3 children. I have this podcast. I have relationships. I volunteer. So I have all these things in my life going on. And how does one pull away from the dopamine of the internet and the series on TV to sit down and contemplate and actually think about things and not just react to things?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the interesting things is I very rarely, if ever, do it while sitting down. So for me, it's when I'm out for a walk, or when I'm riding my motorbike is another real time when these ideas come. But for me, actually, I build it into my day, and I'll go for a walk, and think about whatever it is that I'm working through, or the challenge, or the problem that I'm facing up to, and that is real work. And I think that's the interesting thing. Like, it feels like if your day is not full of meetings, then you're not doing enough work. And that's really dangerous, right? The space between meetings. Most project managers sort of fill their time with meetings because that's a really good way of getting things done. But they also fill their team's time with meetings, and then the team don't have any time to do any of the work. And equally, building that time in to let your brain cogitate through things and work things out is vastly more powerful, because the idea that you come up with for dealing with that particular difficult stakeholder, oh, hang on a second, that other person knows them really well. Maybe I could get them to influence them. Ding! That could unlock, hours, days, weeks, even months of work and effort that you have to do if that stakeholder is not on your side. So that kind of allowing your brain to think things through is so important. And I think being intentional about it is the key. With so many of these things, build it into your diary. I've got a problem. I'm going to notice it down, and then I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to spend some time thinking about that thing, and off you go.
And speaking of contemplation, I just wanted to give everybody an update on my Magic Mind journey here. So now it's been a little over 2 weeks since I started taking Magic Mind daily. And I've got to say, results keep getting better. And I think it ties in well with this conversation, especially about contemplation. So at this point, I'm really starting to feel like the full benefits of Magic Mind is really taking effect. So if you remember, Magic Mind is this little drink that I've been talking about here for the past few episodes, and it is packed with adaptogens, nootropics, and essential vitamins that support mental performance, reduce stress, and boost focus, right? I've been drinking one every morning, and the change in my routine has been really amazing and remarkable. I know sometimes it sounds like it's too good to be true, but it really is. So by now it feels like that Magic Mind has become a key part of my day. I'm waking up more energized, not just physically, mentally too. The mental clarity I've been experiencing is really better. I would say even next level. So I no longer feel like super overwhelmed by the usual distractions or random thoughts that pop up during the day. And instead, I'm able to stay focused for longer periods of time without the usual burnout or stress that sometimes would derail productivity. I'm sure you've experienced that before. But what I love the most is that the effects feel natural. It's not like drinking coffee that gives you that like the jittery and then a crash. It's natural. It's not forced, and it's just sustained focus and calmness. Really cool. It's like my brain has been operating on a new level of efficiency, and I'm really liking it. So if you've been thinking about trying Magic Mind, I can honestly say it's been a game changer for me. And if you're curious to give it a shot, you can get up to 48% off your first subscription or 20% off one-time purchases with code PROJECT20 at checkout. Project20 altogether. Just head on over to magicmind.com/project and enter that code Project20. And I'm going to have links to this in the show notes for today's episode at pmforthemasses.com/153. Now, I can't wait to see how the next few weeks unfold. Stay tuned, and I'll give you some more updates. And James, speaking of calmness and speaking of being able to focus and contemplation, this reminds me of new project managers,
because sometimes they're coming from the individual contributor position in which they are given tasks, right? They're given things to do, and the work is reactive to the things they're given, right? And then all of a sudden you are in the position of a project manager, which there is a strategy, right, element to that, in which there's nobody telling you how to do the thing or what to do, but you have an outcome that you need to achieve, and that might be coming from above. But how to get there, it's creative work that requires contemplation. And maybe this is also a good segue into the types of work that you talk about in your book, the cave, the commons, the collaboration, contemplation. Talk a little bit I thought that was really fascinating, and I don't remember seeing that before in a book on this topic. So can you talk about that a little bit?
So it's really interesting for me, like particularly when COVID hit, right? And we're all sitting there, all of a sudden we're at home. It's very frustrating, right? Because a lot of the meetings that I needed to have, I was chief information officer of a big company at that stage, and a lot of the things I needed to do were in person, and they would have been better if I had been able to go for a coffee with someone or have a team meeting or whatever else. But the flip side was, hang on a second, I've got some time here. I could sit and think things through and maybe write a big presentation or a strategy pack that perhaps I would have struggled to do when I was in the office previously. And that got me thinking about where we have the option to work and the type of work that we do in those places. So in the book, I talk about, like you say, caves, commons, collaboration and contemplation. And the cave is probably for most of us our home working environment, whether that's in the kitchen or in your bedroom, or if you're lucky enough to have an office space. And that's a great place to sit and think things through and work on the bigger projects, the things that need deep work or real kind of intense focus. And then you've got the common areas, right, which are a brilliant place. So if you imagine an open plan office where you've got everybody around and there's noise going on and there's people talking, and that's a great place to hear and understand the context of the organization that you're working in. It's a brilliant place to do things like mentoring and coaching and engaging with your team members and building relationships. But it's quite often a very difficult place to get deep work done. And then collaboration. So in the book, I talk about lots of different techniques for collaboration and facilitation of meetings, and intentionally using that, making sure that you've got a stack of Post-it notes and a flip chart, and that when you're going into a meeting, you're really clear on how you're going to facilitate that thing to make sure that the outcomes you need come out. And I talk a good bit about that in the book and various techniques for doing that. And then the final one, as we were talking about before, is this contemplation, like just standing back, breathing, and giving your brain chance to really think and get to the nub of the challenges or opportunities that you're dealing with.
Brilliant. Really like that. Really, like I said, it speaks. It's really spoke to me, especially the stage of life I am right now. It's like where I actually have all four of those situations all the time, and sometimes it's hard to kind of this is a different mode, and maybe treat it differently.
That's it. We can just be a little bit more intentional about what we try to do in each of those situations.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That's awesome. So if for those listening, if you can see that I'm excited about the book, you should right now. It's really good. And so let's talk a little bit about emotional intelligence then. How would you define it in the context of project management, and why is it so essential?
Yeah, so emotional intelligence, I think a friend of mine gave me a book on emotional intelligence when I was maybe 20 or 22. I struggle, I suppose, naturally with emotional intelligence. I don't think I'm particularly naturally empathetic, or it doesn't come naturally. My wife is. She's amazing, and she's always thinking about other people. And so I was lucky when I was working. I lived in South London, and I was working in a company up in North London. I had this long motorbike commute for like an hour and a quarter each way every day. So 2.5 hours on a day. I was on the motorbike, and I was concentrating on riding and making sure I didn't get into trouble on the motorbike. And I had Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, on repeat on my iPod. This is going back a few years. And what it meant was I turned up to work and I'd have these kind of tools, like real practical things, like smiling and using people's names and being genuinely interested in other people that Dale Carnegie had set out. And I started to just try that, right, and use them almost as kind of tools. And over time, what happened was, although they weren't necessarily immediately natural to me to start with, I found they were really effective and powerful. And all of a sudden I was having better relationships and solving problems more effectively. And it worked really, really well. So I just continued to practice the things. And for me, that's the interesting thing about emotional intelligence. It feels like something that we're either good at or we're not. You're kind of born good at it or you're born bad at it. And that's true, I think, to a certain extent. But I do think you can change. And there's an element of fake it till you make it, right? If you just know that you need to be emotional intelligent, what does that mean? Listen to people, understand the world from their point of view, and then you've got half a chance of solving things with them. And again, I talk about all these kind of ways of doing that and putting yourself in their shoes. And whether or not that is emotional intelligence or whether it's a mechanism for winning friends and influence people doesn't really matter, because the outcomes are the same. People like you a lot more. Your behavior is better and you get better outcomes because your relationships are really good with people.
So is that how you define the emotional intelligence? Is like when you are able to work with people and they like you, I guess. Like maybe that's not the best word, but when you can work together to get the outcomes you need to get?
I'd say that's the outcome. I'd say emotional intelligence for me is the ability to put yourself in the other person's shoes, to see the world from their point of view. Over and over again, all those different people, all those different weird and wonderful people that we come across, all of whom have different approaches and stresses and knowledge and all these different things. And for me, every time, and I'm not perfect, anywhere near perfect at it. And sometimes I'm not even very good at it. When I'm tired, I really do drop the ball on this stuff. But for the most part, 90% of the time, my first thought is, where's this person coming from? What's their world like? And how can I understand it better? And I find that as a mechanism really, really useful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find that. So I think in my case, I probably am maybe better than average at like seeing people, not necessarily like feeling with them, or like your wife is, she's concerned about others. Like maybe I have to like work a bit harder on that part, but I feel like I can understand what's happening, from on that human level beyond work. I can look at somebody and say, okay, here's a human being that, with thoughts and feelings and a history and, and priorities and things like that. And I think because it came more naturally to me, I think I'm lazy in that area. I don't see it something that I need to work on, but I think I need to work on. I think it never stops, because every new person you meet, they're delightfully different, right? So it's always a new discovery. So, is there a way to assess our current level of emotional intelligence to see, okay, I need to improve in this area or that area? What do you think?
So I don't know about assessing it. I suppose making it better. So it's like anything. Like my son is really into Rubik's Cubes, and he's better than anybody else I know on Rubik's Cubes. And yet this weekend he said, Dad, can I sit down with you and we're going to do a 4x4 Rubik's Cube. We're going to watch a YouTube video on how to do 4x4, which is the really complicated version of a Rubik's Cube. And that's the thing that I talk about on the training course. I talk about growth mindset, and I actually teach people how to make balloon animals as a proof that they can learn something quite quickly and get better at it. And I think the way I see emotional intelligence is just that. It's just a skill that I definitely want to get better at. And I'm not sure I'm ever going to not want to get better at it. I'm never going to be at the stage where I'm so good at it that it's not something I want to work at. And so for me, the question then comes, what books can I read? Who can I speak to? Who can I listen to? How can I find things out that are going to make this thing, which I know is so important to the success of everything that I do, better? And you just keep getting better. That you're never there. You're always on the journey.
Mm-hmm. As I was preparing for this, I did some reading about this, and I found like 5 components of emotional intelligence, being self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills. Now, for project managers, what do you think or believe is the most important? And again, self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills. Is that one of those 5 that like, okay, this is if we're starting on your journey of, emotional intelligence?
So interestingly, I'd say probably they're all really important. I've never heard it described like that, but like whichever one you're worst at is probably the place where I'd spend my time. And I think one of the things that I'm listening to an interesting book at the moment called Crucial Conversations, and one of the things that the authors are talking about in that is about your fight or flight mechanism, right? So that sort of self-awareness of, hang on a second, I'm in a situation where my adrenaline is up. Maybe I've been attacked or something's happened, and I feel like, I'm in a different mindset. And this does still happen to me from time to time, particularly I do a lot of volunteer type stuff with the Scouts. And there's environments there where, you can be exhausted, things are going wrong on a camp, and someone says something and, they attack you and you're like, and that recognizing that response and realizing that it's now all of a sudden my body is pumping with adrenaline. I'm in a sort of the evolution of our body has been there to sort of drive us in this kind of fight or flight situation. And all of a sudden I'm in there, and actually all I need to do is have a conversation with a normal person who's actually quite nice. That's a dangerous situation. So spotting something like that is something that I find I have to work on. Not that I'm kind of going to get angry and shout and things, but I might say the wrong thing, or I might sort of make a dig or something that's not appropriate. So for me, back to your point, is take those, and I quite like that model of 5 areas, but take the thing that you're struggling with, right? If it's listening to people or understanding the word from their point of view, or if it's self-regulation, whichever one of those, start working on that, and also be aware of the others and work on those as well.
Interesting. Yeah. I find that in my case, it's motivation. Sometimes I'm just like, I don't know. It's sometimes it's hard to get things started for me. And then I see folks in my professional life who are really motivated, but the downside of that is self-regulation, right? They can't stop. They're always working, then they burn out. So sometimes these kind of play against each other, and it's I like that approach. Like, figure out which one is the one that you need to work on the most, and just kind of start there.
Yeah. So motivation for me is one that I've never really struggled with. I've always loved the things I'm doing, and I work as hard as I choose to now. And now you've read the start of the book, you know that back in 2016, I wasn't necessarily regulating my work levels, right. And I ended up, without giving a spoiler alert, but ended up in quite a sticky situation. And so, but motivation was certainly never a problem for me, but it is for some people. And I really like that model that Dan Pink put together about motivation, which again, I do talk about in the book, about autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So how do you build motivation in people? Well, you give them the chance to influence and have some control over what they're doing. That's the autonomy piece. You give them a chance to grow and get better at stuff, which is mastery. And you explain to them and make it clear why they're doing what they're doing. And if you're missing any of those three things, I think that can be quite detrimental to your motivation. And so, but the great thing about that model is it's really easy to remember those three words: autonomy, mastery, purpose, and take that into a one-to-one with a team member who's maybe lacking a bit of motivation. And then ask yourself the question: do they have autonomy? Are they able to make decisions? And how can I get them into a place where they are? Are they getting better at something? Are they building their mastery? And do they know why they're here and why they're doing? And if they don't, we're going to struggle. So you can take each of those, just three words, remember them, and use that to shape a conversation with a team member who's maybe struggling on motivation.
Do you have an example, like a real life example from your experience, where a project manager or yourself, when emotional intelligence or lack thereof significantly impacted a project's outcome?
Yeah, so I suppose I'll have to have a think about that. I mean, I suppose a lot of people
need to contemplate.
So yeah, exactly. My own emotional intelligence, I think, is something that is built over time. Certainly, there's been examples where I've been in. I can remember a very clear meeting that I was in a good few years ago, probably before that that situation happened, where somebody who didn't know me, didn't know anything about really my background or anything, but kind of said, James, you don't know what you're talking about, and you can't know what you're talking about because you haven't been in this organization for very long. And I felt very, very attacked at that stage. But it was a crucial relationship, and it took all of my effort and skill. And I probably reacted about as well as I possibly could under the circumstances, which was to sort of shut down and not really reply. And then I went out for a walk for like an hour, and then I went and spoke to someone about it. And by the time the adrenaline had subsided, I realized that actually that person just needed to know a bit more about me, and maybe understand a bit more about where I was coming from, and I could show him that stuff. So for me, I think there's lots. I'm sure there's lots of examples in people's lives where and projects where getting this stuff wrong can break relationships, which can then break projects. I suppose I've been lucky that I've kind of, because I've been focusing on this so much for such a long period of time, I tend to probably catch it now much more effectively and be able to fix it, even if it's getting a bit broken. So the big consequences don't necessarily come from emotional intelligence on my projects anymore, so much as, but I'm sure they do in lots of cases. And the relationships between other people as well can cause huge problems, and how you navigate that is really interesting.
Yeah, I've been in. I can think of one particular project was we had to deal with a high-level stakeholder within the organization and person difficult to work with. And my first bit of advice was like, changing people is out of scope. You can't do, that's not part of the project. You can't wish that people were different so you could work better with them. So either choose to adapt to them and learn how they operate and kind of build on that, or you can choose to go work somewhere else. But that's it's hard enough to change ourselves, right? Like, let alone change other people. So it's knowing.
Yeah, and like one of the things I talk about is arseholes. I don't know if that's too strong a word to use on the on the podcast, but like in my career, in 20 plus years working on projects and in lots of different organizations, I have never in my entire career come across a single arsehole. Never. All those people who I've worked with various different behaviors and ways of expressing themselves, not one single one of them considers themselves to be an arsehole. And I think that's the interesting thing, because I kind of understood that quite early in my career. Nobody sees themselves, or it's very difficult to see your own behavior as wrong or bad. And therefore, if you behave as if someone's behavior is wrong or bad, they're going to react to it. And so realizing that and understanding the world from their perspective quite often can sort of tame that beast a little bit. Which is, I just find it a useful construct in my own brain to think about the things that I can control, and the things I can control are my own behavior. And very often listening to other people is the answer to anything to do with relationships. Almost always it comes back to how well have you listened to that person and how well have you understood the world from their perspective.
Yeah, that's so hard sometimes, especially if you have already, like, like that one person that told you that you didn't know what you were talking about, and then maybe the next time you talk to them, they are rude again, and then you kind of build this narrative in your mind that this person is an asshole, right?
Yeah.
And then next time you meet them, you just go into that conversation with that assumption, and then your reaction is going to be, okay, they're going to be talking to somebody, who is having to deal with an asshole, right? So of course you're going to act differently. You're going to be more defensive. You're going to be more curt, things like that. So
yeah, and I think and that's the point, is these relationships can deteriorate quite quickly once you get into that mindset. And again, I'm far from perfect on this stuff, but being aware of it and controlling the behavior that you can, and putting yourself in their shoes wherever possible, is very helpful.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the biggest challenges I find in project management, especially for new project managers, is delivering difficult news, right? Especially like to your boss or to different stakeholders. So, can emotional intelligence help us communicate more effectively when it's time to deliver bad news? And what's your experience in that area?
Yeah. So again, I think there's a slight challenge to the question, right? Which is, emotional intelligence is this slightly amorphous thing, which is kind of like just being better at emotional intelligence. Like it's like being better at running,
right?
Whereas for me, or the Rubik's Cube, right? Whereas for me, what I like to think about is the techniques and approaches and behavior that I can bring to that situation, whether it's emotionally intelligent or not, that's going to make it better. So for example, practical advice like, don't have that conversation. If it's a difficult conversation, don't have it in a room full of people, right? Have it one-to-one, in a quiet place once everybody's calmed down. Those kind of very practical things. And then asking questions, finding out what's coming on from that the other person's perspective. Those practical things, I think, are where the value is. And we can call that emotional intelligence if we want to. But I think actually those practical things are things that we can all learn and teach to our colleagues and friends and each other.
Right. Yes. It's like a proxy to emotional intelligence. It's like,
fake it till you make it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then in the process, you see, okay, that worked. So internally, you learned something, and
that's it.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, speaking of practical, right? So let's say folks listening right now, let's say somebody's like struggling with this. They feel like things happen, and let's say they're not giving an opportunity to lead this project or that project, and they believe that maybe I'm not reading the cues, maybe it's emotional intelligence, I read this in a book somewhere, is there like a first step? Like, what is the first step for, like, let's say I never thought about this before and I want to get started. Where should I start?
So for me, I think, have you heard of the hippo?
The hippo?
The hippo, the highest paid person's opinion.
Oh, yeah. It's in your book.
Yeah. So this is something I talk about a lot, right? Which is how to engage and get ideas from people. And for me, a technique like silent writing, which again I cover, is really powerful because it allows all these kind of ideas and things to come out. So how you facilitate either a meeting or discussion with a group of people or someone else as a technique can make a big difference to the quality of the conversations that come out of it. If you're talking about something like a promotion or the opportunity to run a big project, the way I would address that is probably one-to-one with whoever the decision maker is or whoever the influencer is that I need to speak to. I'd go and ask them, okay, so what does it look like from your perspective for me to be able to prove to you that I can do this, right? What do I need to do in the interim to show you that this is something I can do? And then they're going to give you a list of challenges or practical projects or things that you can do, and you can keep working through that stuff and get better. And maybe you'll realize, hang on a second, I'm not actually ready to do this yet, and I need to learn some of this other stuff and get better at it. And maybe you are already good enough at that stuff, and you can just show them that you are. And all of a sudden that then opens up the conversation that maybe a few months down the line, you then invited to go and run something bigger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe we can talk a little bit about the hippo and silent writing, because that was fascinating too. Like, can you talk without spoiling too much of the book? Can you talk a little
I don't mind.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a powerful technique. So this idea with the hippo is that you're in a meeting, you're trying to come up with, I don't know, the risks or something for the project, right? And you're trying to discuss it. And what happens is, one person, and they don't have to be the highest paid, very often they are, but the most influential person or the most experienced person or the most knowledgeable person will share their idea or their thought, and everyone else will kind of sit back and leave it to them, right? Because they kind of either trust them to have a good answer or the right answer, or they just don't want to get involved in the politics of challenging them. And that's a real thing that happens over and over again in meetings, and I do a lot of work with C-suite executives, and they're very aware of this as a problem. And very often they say to me, James, how do I get good ideas out of my team? And the answer is shut up. So what I do is, the response to the hippo problem, or one of the ways that you can deal with it, is this idea of silent writing. So if you want to identify, let's say, the real risks on a project, things that could go wrong, instead of just having a conversation about it, or the thing that everyone does is just sits and writes their own ideas and doesn't really ask anybody else. But if you actually just ask that question in a facilitated meeting, give everyone some Post-it notes and a pen and say, right, guys, write down what you think might go wrong on this project. And then you invigilate the thing, right? So you say, everybody shut up, no talking. I want your ideas. I want you to write them down. I'm going to give you 5 minutes to write, and I want you to think. I want you to look off into space if necessary and think about the things that you're worried about on this project, and write those things down. And what happens in that 5 minutes, and it's really short, is magic, because instead of everybody sitting and relying on someone else to speak, all of the people in the room have to write stuff down. And once those ideas are down, they're on a Post-it note, they become a physical thing. They're real. They're not going anywhere. And then you can go and gather those up using something like affinity clustering, and you can prioritize them using voting or another technique. And that gives you all of it's a much better way of identifying the things that could go wrong on the project, right? And the great power of that is that then you can deal with them as ideas, and they're sort of disassociated from the individual once they're on a Post-it note. They're disassociated, and therefore the politics disappears out of the room, and it becomes a discussion about the ideas or the risks or the tasks or whatever it is that you're talking about. And that's extremely powerful because it gives a voice to those quieter, more junior members of the team.
Yeah, love that. And I also like how how you even go into the detail of how to peel off a Post-it note from the.
I have a little bit of fun. I mean, I'm not the first person to do that. There's videos and things. I think it's a bit of a running joke in the agile community about how to do a Post-it note. But I do use them a lot, and I do think that they are a very powerful tool that is often overlooked, and people use them for taking notes to themselves. But as a facilitation technique to get ideas from your team, they are really, really cool. Mm-hmm. I'm still looking for my sponsorship deal with 3M, but it hasn't come yet.
You're trying hard.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about like uncertainty and change. There's a lot of that going on right now, right? Like in the economy, the politics of the world. We just had a huge election in the United States right now, which affects the entire world and maybe be affecting the stock market, which affects your company and your project. So how can what we're talking about here today, emotional intelligence or this ability to work with people, how can that help project managers lead through difficult times of uncertainty and change?
Yeah, again, I suppose the skill or the behavior of emotional intelligence for me is less important than the practical approaches that you take to have good discussions with people. So if you're looking at uncertainty, then if you find yourself, one of the things that I describe in the book is this problem with change request purgatory, right? So all of a sudden there's a new administration in the US and we have to change everything, and they've legislated for something else, and we have to change loads of things on the project. And lots of traditional waterfall type projects end up in this kind of painful, iterative, like loads and loads of effort to make a change to the scope of the project or the time frame or anything like that. And for me, that's an indication that you should be pulling in some of those more agile techniques, whether that's Scrum or Kanban or XP or whichever one you're aware of and using. And I think using some of those techniques and approaches to have then great conversations. So in the book, I spend a lot of time talking about prioritization. And it's not just because it's so important for projects to prioritize things. It's also because it's a really powerful way to have great conversations with your stakeholders about what needs to happen. And in the context of, should we do so? A lot of people do this kind of Moscow prioritization. You've probably heard of it: must, should, could, won't prioritization. And what that ends up with is a big problem, right? It's this bucket of must things that have to happen, but nothing prioritized within the bucket. And that causes a lot of bad behavior because people it doesn't cost them anything to put something else in the bucket of must. And all the way through through companies, this causes problems. So what I recommend people do is actual prioritization, however you do it. And I do talk about some different ways of doing it in the book, but this is number one, this is number two, this is number three, this is number four, this is number five, right? Number five is not as important to do as number one. So guys, if we want to fit in a number three, guess what? Then number five becomes number six. And just using that mechanism, which is really nothing more than a product backlog from Scrum, just using that mechanism all of a sudden creates much better conversations about the things, the decisions that are required when we live in an uncertain world, which you're absolutely right, we really do.
Mm-hmm. And also a big topic of your book and your other podcast appearances has been the low stress. I mean, it's in the tagline for the book, look how low stress project management. And you mentioned earlier the introduction to your book, and where you had an interesting event happen to you in your life there that kind of was a wake-up call. Are there like maybe some habits or routines? You talked about contemplation and going for walks, and I like the fact that you ride a motorbike, which is I'm reading the book and you talk about that like it's a thing that everybody does, but I hope you understand it's kind of unusual.
Yeah. No, it is. Yeah.
And it's great, but are there specific habits or routines, for example, that you can recommend for let's say project managers, right? So we can improve not only in being more aware, but also having less stress in our day-to-day, so you can actually be more effective at work and in life as well.
Yeah, well, it's a lot of the stuff we've talked about. So first of all, having a prioritized list and being really clear and careful on how long things, your estimate of things that, of how long things are going to take, and listening to people about those things, and being clear that when that changes, you be transparent about what's happening. So that's probably one. Prioritization is crucial. Another one that I really I see a lot of people struggling with is risk. So people, lots of projects go wrong, right? You can quote various stats, but like the vast majority of projects don't deliver everything that they thought they were going to deliver in the time that they thought they were going to deliver it for the cost that they thought they were going to deliver, and that's because stuff goes wrong. Right. And identifying and managing risk is so badly done in so many organizations that it's probably the thing I'd like people to understand and focus a lot on. And, if they are reading the book. So risk identification using something like that silent writing and the SAVE technique that we talked about earlier on, but also risk identification using something like ChatGPT can be really powerful. You identify those risks and then great, you're going to do some stuff about it. That's the normal mitigation stuff that we all do as part of project management. But that's not good enough for me. I think that if we only do that, then we leave all the pressure on the project manager and on the project team. What I think we need to do, and this is actually in the PMBOK, is associate the contingency of our project back to those risks, those things that can go wrong. But almost nobody does it, and I don't really understand why. I think it's because they're so focused on passing the exam that they miss that bit, right? And they're worried about earned value and value at completion and all that other stuff. But what happens if you do that? If you identify a risk and say, if this thing isn't signed off by the 5th of October, we're going to miss the Christmas release date, which is going to cost us 100,000 euros because we're going to end up having to go live in the Easter outage window. And you make that clear to your stakeholder who's going to be signing off on the thing. You say, if you don't sign off by this date, it's going to cost you 100,000 euros. Would you like to sign off by this date? They're going to find a way to get involved and understand what they need to do so that they can sign off by that date. And all of a sudden, you've changed their behavior by making it clear to them what their behavior causes, the cost. And that use of contingency is hugely powerful. So if you're trying to reduce stress, being transparent about the things that could go wrong, by all means, what you're doing about them, but also what other people can do about them and what it'll cost if they don't, I think that's a huge way of reducing stress.
Awesome. Yeah, it is. The whole approach to risk, even when covered, in books like that, when you get down to actually doing the work, people get busy doing the things that they need to do and checking the boxes and moving forward and the deadlines. And sometimes there is like a risk workshop where we like list them all, put them in a spreadsheet somewhere with the name next to them. But it almost becomes just like something we do because it has to be done, not because it's a useful tool, a useful exercise to actually help us. And I like your approach here because it's not just about helping when things go wrong, but it helps with your stress level because deep inside you know that there's a contingency plan and if this happens, you know that this is what we're going to do about it and the impact it's going to have on the project, right? So
that's it. And even if you don't have a full contingency plan, you've made it clear to the people who've got power in the organization that if stuff goes wrong, this is what it's going to cost them. And all of a sudden, if that stuff does go wrong, great. Yeah. They're going to pony up with some money and you'll be able to do the contingency plan that you need to then generate, right? So instead of worrying about that and stressing about it, which I'm very natural to do, like in the middle of the night, that's, turning off my brain is brutal. You're now getting it and you're sharing it. And that whole thing about a problem shared is a problem halved. Well, shared with the right people, shared with the stakeholder who's going to pay for the thing if it goes wrong and can do something about it. It's a fraction of the level of stress.
Right. It also helps with the scope changes and creep as well when it comes from above, because you can point to them, oh yeah, I can make that change, but this is what happens, to your budget, to your timeline, to your quality, to your,
Well, that's why that prioritized list is so important of saying, this is number one, this is number two, this is number three. And if you squeeze in X, it's going to bump, these things off the bottom. That's okay. We can do that if you want to. Oh, hang on a second. I thought I could just get it for free. No, you can't have it for free. You can have it, it's going to cost you something to include that.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. James, this is, I feel like we should have another call to talk about all these other topics. There's just so much to talk about. I really like your approach to the topic of project management, and it's just so novel and interesting. So let me share here. The name of the book is Leading Impactful Teams, Achieve Lowest Stress Success in Project Management. And James, thank you so much for being on the show. If people want to learn more about you, what you do, and how to get the book, I heard that there's an audiobook on Audible coming up soon. Where should they go?
Yeah. So the easiest place to reach out to me is LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, and my name is pretty distinctive, so you can find me quite easily. So just ping me on LinkedIn and get connected. I do have a website. The book is available. You might have to order it. It's not massively widely distributed physically, but it's available on all the online shops. And like you say, the audiobook, we recorded it over the summer. I just uploaded it, this week. So we're going to get that out in the next couple of weeks. So connect with me on LinkedIn. It'd be really interesting to see and hear from people who've listened to the podcast and would like to get into a bit more of this stuff.
Sounds good. And I'll have links to your LinkedIn, to your website, and how to get the book and the audiobook on the show notes for today's episode at pmforthemasses.com/153. pmforthemasses.com/153. James, thank you so much. It's great to meet you. Thank you for writing that awesome book. And maybe we'll have another conversation in the near future, because there's just so much to talk about.
Sounds great, Cesar. Thanks ever so much for having me on.
Thank you for listening to the PM for the Masses podcast.
Tune in next week for more great ideas on how to manage your projects better and truly stand out in your industry.
pmforthemasses.com